and Dave's got a very good story. We heard earlier on from Kate the consequence of trapping or the impact on native birds, but Dave's been trapping, or Cranbourne Botanic Gardens has been trapping for a couple of years now, and as Andrea was saying, we need the monitoring, we need that data to confirm what all of us intuitively think is happening. Anyway, David, go ahead. And the front pews might need to turn around.
Thanks, Bill. This is where I'm lucky enough to work. I'm a bushland management technician at Royal Botanic Gardens, Cranbourne, in the conservation zone. What you're looking at here is heathland. Sorry, Cranbourne is 50 kilometres southeast of Melbourne, in Victoria. What you're looking at here is heathland community, which is going down into wet heathland, heathy woodland and grassy woodland, and they're all quite high quality vegetation communities with associated fauna. They're examples of some of the best quality of these vegetation types in Victoria, let alone 50 kilometres from Melbourne. So it really is a biodiversity hotspot. We have good representation of amphibians, reptiles, mammals, including the listed southern brown bandicoot, and of course birds. So the site's significant, and it's been recognised by ornithological groups as being significant for quite some time. Bird counts have been conducted since the 1980s, monthly bird counts, and more recently in the depot precinct, weekly bird counts conducted by volunteers. The monthly bird counts were showing that common miners were becoming more frequently observed, and had in fact become established in the surroundings of the conservation zone. I'm not sure if I mentioned it's 400 hectares. So a fairly regular shape, it's a square shape. Common miners really only being seen in these edge areas, but being only 50 kilometres from Melbourne, traditionally an agricultural area is now becoming more and more suburbanised, and that has a lot of management issues apart from minor birds, of course. So we had to work out whether this was going to be a management issue which was worth tackling, along with all those other issues. So at that stage, there wasn't a lot of data showing what impact minor birds might be having on native species. This is back, we're talking about 2006. That data was being collected by various people, but we didn't have it at our fingertips. So we had this great resource of bird counts going back so many years, so we had some pretty good data to go on with. So the next stage was to talk to management to see whether we could get approval for this. It wasn't easy. At that stage, or just previous to our asking for approval, the Royal Botanic Gardens Melbourne, of which we are a division, had their fingers burnt somewhat by a public relations issue in moving the grey-headed flying fox from the Fern Gully area of the Royal Botanic Gardens further up the Yarra. And this translocation had a lot of public interest. Perhaps could have been handled a little better. So we had a reluctance for the Royal Botanic Gardens to get involved in wildlife control once again. But so it wasn't really till 2009 that we got approval, so it was 3 years. We started free feeding, and we started free feeding a lot of bandicoots. Noticed a lot of fat little fellas getting around and realised that we had to do something about that. So if there's anyone having trouble with bandicoots taking minor birds feed, then come and talk to me later and I can tell you how to solve that particular problem. We started out with a minor magnet, but had more success with the PG traps. Not through any particular fault of the minor magnet, I don't think, but perhaps the fault of us being rookie trappers. But we eventually removed 250 miners, 200 in the first year and just the 50 in the second year, which goes with what we've been hearing today. So the minor bird count continued. If you can just have a look at the blue line bobbing along there, 30 to 40 birds, I suppose, counted in the weekly minor bird counts of 2006, and you can see that in recent years that number seems to have declined down to 10 to 20 birds observed in the weekly count. Just ignore the orange line at the moment. I'm having a little bit of challenge as far as PowerPoint goes, and I couldn't work out how to put that up later on. But if you keep following the blue line, you'll see that there's been a decline. But due to trapping, well, this is a fairly a minor trial, minor trial, and so it's difficult for us to tell whether it's trapping induced or something else. The orange line represents our control, and one of the fundamental flaws of our trial was that this control didn't start earlier. This is a minor bird count in a neighbouring property where trapping is not occurring. It should have been started well before we started trapping so that we could get an idea of whether minor birds were declining on a landscape scale or just within our site. Having read Kate and her colleagues' benign or pariah paper recently, decided to look at some of the small birds which they thought might be impacted by minor bird abundance. So I've selected 4 species of our more abundant small birds to look at here. And interesting that the abundance of those birds seems to have increased about the time that common minor trapping started, and has continued to show that abundance even though we've stopped trapping over the last year. We can't draw any real conclusions from this, but it just sort of piques our interest and makes us think that, well, perhaps a more well-funded trial with multiple sites might be an idea. We also looked at species richness, and we found that perhaps when we do a weekly count and we count a lot of minor birds, there's not a lot of different native species appear on those days, and vice versa. So again, difficult to draw huge conclusions from, but interesting and probably worth looking at a little bit further. So probably those first 3 dot points we've already talked about today. Getting down to the 4th dot point, transect count information, vital, and it has to start before trapping to give you a sense of whether your trapping is effective or not, of course. So I'd encourage any group that's thinking about starting trapping to try and prolong the period of transect counts before you begin trapping. Give yourself at least a year, if not 2, of transect count data before you start to employ traps. So really get to know your site and get to know what birds are there before you start trapping. This was a very small trial, difficult to gain clear evidence, and as I suggested before, we need a larger trial with multiple sites and multiple controls. Thank you very much.
One of the things that the data did show earlier on was that there was both an increase in abundance and richness of the native bird population once minor numbers had dropped. So I think just keep that in mind, because I think that does support superficially, if not more deeply, that there is a very strong correlation such that Kate found that when you remove minors, there is some bounce back. Now, one of the things that we had discussed with Andrea and with others was about trap shyness and the development of trap shyness. And that's going to be a potential problem for a lot of us, and we're experiencing that already in some parts of Canberra, and it may well be exacerbated by people not abiding by Susanna's mantra about not going near the trap during the daylight hours. And in fact, that is one lesson I think that we will need to give to all of our members. We haven't been stressing that to date, what we've been stressing to people is not to euthanize the birds in view, or break their necks or whatever, in view of miners. But really, I think what the lesson that's coming out from both what Susanna is saying and what Marie and Andrea is saying is that don't let miners associate people and traps. And I think as a lot of our people report back to us is that when they walk out their back door, miners who might be on the power lines or on their back tree will just instantly fly away. And that's because they've associated that person with being a bad person to be around.